Hello everyone. I am the boring historian, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax.
The medieval period, spanning roughly a millennium from the 5th to the 15th century, is often caricatured in popular imagination as an era of filth, disease, and primitive living conditions. The stereotypical medieval peasant is depicted as unwashed, lice-ridden, and oblivious to the most basic principles of hygiene. However, this simplistic view fails to capture the complex reality of hygiene practices during this extensive historical period. Far from being uniformly filthy, medieval society maintained a sophisticated, if different, understanding of cleanliness that varied dramatically based on region, time period, social class, and religious affiliation. This comprehensive exploration of medieval hygiene aims to dispel common misconceptions while presenting a nuanced picture of how people across various strata of society approach personal cleanliness, sanitation, and health. By examining primary sources, archaeological evidence, and contemporary scholarship, we can reconstruct a more accurate understanding of medieval attitudes toward hygiene and their practical implementation in daily life. The medieval world was not static, but rather a dynamic landscape where hygiene practices evolved over time, responding to changing circumstances, new knowledge, and cultural exchange. From the sophisticated bathhouses of the Islamic world to the practical cleanliness routines of European monasteries, from the lavish grooming rituals of nobility to the pragmatic washing habits of peasants, this narrative explores the multifaceted nature of medieval hygiene across a diverse and changing continent. To understand medieval hygiene practices, we must first situate them within the broader historical context of the period. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the late 5th century marked a significant transition in many aspects of European life, including hygiene infrastructure. The elaborate public baths, aqueducts, and sewage systems that had characterized Roman urban centers gradually fell into disrepair or were abandoned altogether in many regions, though some Roman infrastructure continued to be used and maintained, particularly in areas like Byzantine-controlled territories. The fragmentation of political authority in the early medieval period led to more localized approaches to sanitation and hygiene, with solutions varying widely depending on available resources, climate, and existing knowledge. As new political entities emerged and towns began to grow again in the High Middle Ages, 11th, 13th centuries, communities faced the challenge of managing waste and providing clean water for growing populations. By the late medieval period, many European cities had developed sophisticated, if imperfect, systems for addressing hygiene needs. Religious institutions, particularly monasteries, played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting knowledge about health and hygiene throughout the medieval period. The Christian Church, while sometimes ambivalent about excessive attention to bodily comforts, nevertheless recognized the importance of cleanliness in community living and often established rules regarding bathing, washing, and waste management. The medieval period also saw significant cross-cultural exchange of ideas about health and hygiene, particularly through contact with the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. The Crusades, trade networks, and diplomatic missions all facilitated the transmission of medical knowledge and hygiene practices across cultural boundaries. Islamic medical texts, many of which preserved and expanded upon classical Greek and Roman knowledge, made their way into European intellectual circles and influenced thinking about cleanliness and disease prevention. Understanding medieval hygiene requires us to set aside our modern assumptions about what constitutes proper cleanliness. Medieval people operated within a different framework of medical knowledge, technological capabilities, and cultural expectations. Their approach to hygiene was neither primitive nor arbitrary, but rather reflected a coherent, if sometimes incorrect, understanding of health and disease within the constraints of their time. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people were generally concerned with personal cleanliness and made regular efforts to keep themselves clean within the constraints of their environment and resources. While daily immersive bathing, as we know it today, was not the norm for most people, various forms of washing were common practice across all social classes. The most basic and widespread hygiene practice was the daily washing of hands and face, typically performed upon waking. This top and tail washing, cleaning the face, hands, armpits, and genital areas, was considered the minimum standard of cleanliness for respectable individuals. A basin and ewer, a pitcher or jug, were common household items even in modest homes, specifically used for this purpose. The well-to-do might have servants pour water over their hands into basins, while the less affluent would use whatever water sources were available to them. Hand washing was particularly emphasized in connection with meals. Medical texts and etiquette guides alike stress the importance of washing hands before and after eating, a practice made all the more necessary by the fact that most people ate with their fingers rather than utensils. The Les Contenances de Table, a medieval etiquette guide, instructed diners to ensure your fingers be clean and your fingernails well groomed before coming to the table. Personal cleanliness extended beyond mere washing. People were advised to keep their nails trimmed and clean, and various methods were employed to deal with body odor. Those who could afford it might use scented oils or herbal preparations to mask unpleasant smells, while others relied on regularly changed clothing, particularly linen undergarments that absorbed sweat, and herbal sachets placed among clothing. While the frequency of full-body bathing varied widely depending on access to facilities, social class, and local customs, it was by no means unknown or uncommon in medieval society. Several forms of bathing existed, ranging from simple sponge baths at home to elaborate rituals at public bathhouses. For most ordinary people, a complete bath might be taken weekly, monthly, or seasonally, depending on circumstances. These baths typically took place in wooden tubs, partially filled with water that had been heated over a fire. As heating water required significant labor and fuel, bathing water was often used by multiple family members in succession, starting with the highest status male and proceeding down the social hierarchy. The wealthy enjoyed more frequent and comfortable bathing experiences. Kings and nobles might have permanent bathing chambers in their residences, complete with tubs lined with linen and filled with heated scented water. King John of England, for example, traveled with his own bathtub and bath attendant, and records show he took multiple baths within short periods. His descendant, Edward III, had a bathroom at Westminster, with both hot and cold running water by 1351. Public bathhouses, known as stews or bagnios, were common features in many medieval towns and cities, particularly from the 12th century onward. These establishments offered citizens the opportunity to bathe in communal tubs or pools, often segregated by gender but sometimes mixed. Bathing in these establishments was as much a social activity as a hygienic one. People would gather to bathe, socialize, eat, drink, and even conduct business. The bathhouses often provided additional services such as hair washing, shaving, cupping, a medical procedure, and sometimes prostitution, which eventually led to their decline due to moral concerns and fears about disease transmission. during epidemic outbreaks. In the Islamic world, the hammam or public bath was an even more central institution, combining ritual purification with social gathering. These bathhouses, often architecturally impressive structures with multiple chambers maintained at different temperatures, offered visitors a progression through rooms for sweating, washing, and relaxation. Similar establishments existed in Byzantine territories, continuing the Roman tradition of the thermae or bath complex. Bathing customs were influenced by both practical considerations and medical theories. Medieval physicians generally recommended bathing for health reasons, believing it helped balance the body's humors by removing harmful excretions through the pores. However, they also cautioned that excessive bathing could weaken the body by opening the pores too much, potentially allowing disease to enter. During times of epidemic disease, medical authorities often advised against bathing, particularly in public facilities, as they correctly observed that disease seemed to spread in these communal settings, though they misunderstood the exact mechanism of transmission. Medieval people demonstrated awareness of oral hygiene, though their methods differed significantly from modern dental care. Without toothbrushes as we know them, people cleaned their teeth using a variety of implements and substances. The most common tooth cleaning tool was the chew stick or toothstick, typically made from hazel, willow, or other woods with natural antiseptic properties. These sticks would be chewed at one end to create a frayed brush-like texture, then used to scrub the teeth. Small pieces of wool cloth might also be used to rub the teeth clean. For the wealthy, toothpicks made of metal or bone were common dining accessories. Various substances served as dentifrices or tooth cleaning agents. These included mixtures of herbs, salt, and sometimes abrasives like powdered charcoal or chalk. Some recipes called for sage leaves rubbed directly on the teeth, while others recommended rinsing the mouth with wine, vinegar, or water infused with herbs like mint or rosemary. Mouthwashes were also used to freshen breath and, people believed, to strengthen the gums. These were typically made from herb-infused wines or vinegars. Cloves, cinnamon, and other aromatic spices were chewed to improve breath odor, particularly before social interactions. Dental problems were nevertheless common, resulting from a combination of abrasive foods, which contained stone particles from millstones, sugary treats for the wealthy, and the limitations of contemporary oral hygiene methods. Extraction was the primary treatment for severe tooth decay, typically performed by barbers or specialized practitioners rather than physicians. Hair care constituted another important aspect of medieval personal hygiene, with practices varying by gender, social status, and regional customs. Regular combing was perhaps the most universal hair care practice, serving both to detangle the hair and to remove lice and other parasites. Combs made of bone, wood, or ivory were common personal possessions, and archaeological finds suggest they were used across all social classes. Hair washing occurred less frequently than combing, but was recommended by medical authorities at intervals ranging from every few days to once every 3 weeks. Various cleansing agents were employed, including lye soap made from wood ash and animal fat, herb-infused waters, and egg yolks. After washing, hair might be treated with oils or herbal rinses to improve its appearance and scent. For women, whose hair was typically worn long, elaborate grooming rituals could involve hours of combing, braiding, and arranging, particularly among the nobility. Men's hairstyles varied more widely by period, region, and status, from the tonsured heads of monks to the elaborate curls favored by courtiers in certain periods. Facial hair for men was similarly subject to changing fashions and cultural expectations. Monks were typically clean-shaven, requiring daily shaving by a fellow brother, while knights and nobles might sport elaborate beards or mustaches, depending on current court fashions. Barbers provided shaving services for those who could afford them, using straight razors that required regular sharpening. Both men and women sometimes used various concoctions to alter their hair color, with blonde hair being particularly prized in many European courts. Recipes for lightening hair included mixtures of honey, vinegar, and various herbs left to sit in the sun. In the Islamic world, hair care was influenced by religious practices that emphasized cleanliness. The Prophet Muhammad was said to have recommended regular hair washing and the use of oils, practices that were widely adopted. Henna was commonly used to color hair and beards, serving both decorative and symbolic purposes. Medieval attitudes toward cleanliness were complex and multifaceted, shaped by religious teachings, medical theories, practical concerns, and cultural traditions. Far from the simplistic view that medieval people were indifferent to cleanliness, evidence suggests a widespread recognition of its importance, albeit understood through a different conceptual framework than our modern one. Cleanliness in medieval thought was often connected to moral purity and social order. Clean appearances and surroundings were seen as reflections of an orderly soul and a well-regulated household or community. Conversely, filth and disorder were associated with moral failing, social disruption, and potentially dangerous influences. Medical theory reinforced these associations by linking cleanliness to health. According to humoral theory, the dominant medical paradigm of the period, the body needed to rid itself of excess humors through various excretions including sweat, urine, and feces. Regular washing removed these potentially harmful substances from the body's surface, preventing them from being reabsorbed or causing local irritations. However, attitudes toward cleanliness were not uniform across medieval society. Religious ascetics sometimes rejected bodily cleanliness as part of their rejection of worldly comforts, while courtly culture increasingly emphasized cleanliness and pleasant scents as markers of refinement. Urban populations developed communal approaches to sanitation that balanced practical needs with limited resources, while rural communities maintained their own traditions of personal and environmental cleanliness adapted to agricultural lifestyles. Cross-cultural encounters also influenced perceptions of cleanliness. European crusaders and merchants who traveled to the Byzantine and Islamic worlds often remarked on the elaborate bathing customs they encountered there, sometimes adopting these practices and sometimes rejecting them as foreign or morally suspect. Throughout the medieval period, standards of cleanliness served as important markers of social status and identity. The ability to maintain a clean appearance through regular washing, frequent changes of clothing, and access to grooming services was directly related to one's wealth and social position. For the nobility, elaborate personal hygiene rituals demonstrated both their wealth, in terms of servants, heated water, and luxurious cleansing products, and their refinement. A lord or lady might have personal attendants dedicated solely to their grooming needs, private bathing chambers, and an array of scented oils, herbs, and cosmetics. Clean, well-maintained hands with manicured nails were particularly important signs of gentility, indicating that one did not engage in manual labor. The emerging urban middle classes of merchants and skilled craftspeople often emulated noble hygiene practices to the extent their resources allowed, using cleanliness as one way to assert their rising social status. Guild regulations sometimes included hygiene requirements for members, recognizing that the reputation of the trade depended partly on the appearance of its practitioners. For the working classes, cleanliness took more practical forms. focused on removing the dirt and sweat accumulated through physical labor. While they lacked the resources for elaborate bathing rituals, evidence suggests that most peasants and urban workers made regular efforts to wash, particularly before religious observances and communal gatherings. Professional groups developed their own standards and rituals of cleanliness. Physicians, for example, were expected to appear clean and well-groomed to inspire confidence in their patients, while food handlers in many towns were subject to regulations about personal cleanliness. Religious status also influenced hygiene practices. Monks and nuns followed specific rules regarding washing and grooming, balancing the practical needs of communal living with ideals of simplicity and moderation. Jewish communities maintained distinct traditions of ritual purification and cleanliness based on religious law, which sometimes set them apart from their Christian neighbors. The persistent modern stereotype of the filthy medieval peasant owes more to later periods' prejudices than to historical reality. This misconception has multiple origins, including early modern writers who exaggerated medieval filth to emphasize their own era's supposed superiority, Victorian historians who selectively interpreted sources, and modern popular culture that continues to perpetuate these images. One significant source of misunderstanding comes from medieval religious writings that describe extreme ascetics who rejected bathing and grooming as forms of religious devotion. These exceptional cases were recorded precisely because they deviated from normal expectations, but later readers sometimes mistook them for typical behavior. For example, Queen Isabella of Castile supposedly boasted that she had bathed only twice in her life, at birth and before her wedding. Rather than representing typical medieval attitudes, this extreme position reflected Isabella's exceptional personal piety and deliberate rejection of bodily comforts as a form of religious devotion. In contrast, her own daughter Juana of Castile bathed so frequently that her husband worried about her health, reflecting both the medical theories of the time and the fact that regular bathing was common enough to be unremarkable among the nobility. Another source of misconception stems from changes in the definition of cleanliness itself. Medieval standards differed from modern ones, focusing more on visible cleanliness, pleasant smells, and removal of obvious dirt rather than the elimination of invisible microorganisms, a concept unknown before the development of germ theory in the 19th century. Archaeological evidence consistently contradicts the image of universal filth, revealing grooming implements, washing facilities, and sophisticated sanitation systems across various settings. Excavations of medieval villages, towns, castles, and monasteries have uncovered combs, tweezers, ear scoops, and other personal care items, along with evidence of drainage systems, cesspits, and washing areas. The medieval period also saw significant technological innovations in hygiene, from the development of new types of soap to the creation of urban infrastructure for water supply and waste removal. These innovations would not have occurred in a society indifferent to cleanliness. Perhaps most importantly, medieval people's own writings reveal a consistent concern with cleanliness. Medical texts, household management guides, civic regulations, and personal letters all contain numerous references to washing, bathing, clean clothing, and waste management, indicating that these matters were of regular concern to people at all levels of society. Christianity's influence on medieval hygiene practices was complex and sometimes contradictory. On one hand, the religion emphasized spiritual purity over physical cleanliness, with some church fathers expressing suspicion toward excessive attention to bodily comforts, including bathing. On the other hand, Christian teachings about charity and community care led to the establishment of hospitals, public fountains, and other facilities that improved public health. Early Christian attitudes toward bathing were shaped partly by reactions against Roman bathing culture, which Christians associated with sensuality and moral laxity. St. Jerome warned that a clean body and a clean dress mean an unclean soul, while other religious writers cautioned against the vanity and sensual pleasure potentially associated with bathing. These concerns were particularly directed at mixed-gender bathing and elaborate bathing rituals involving perfumes, massages, and other luxuries. However, basic cleanliness was never rejected by mainstream Christian teaching. The ritual of baptism itself created a powerful symbolic link between physical washing and spiritual purification. Many saints' lives included stories of miraculous healing through washing, further reinforcing the positive associations between cleanliness and divine grace. In practice, Christian institutions developed their own approaches to hygiene that balanced spiritual concerns with practical necessities. Monasteries, which served as models for much of medieval society, established clear rules regarding washing. The rule of Saint Benedict, for instance, prescribed regular hand washing before meals and recommended bathing for the sick as needed, while suggesting moderation in bathing for healthy monks. Monastic complexes often included sophisticated water management systems, with channels bringing fresh water for drinking, cooking, and washing, and separate channels carrying away waste. Many monasteries maintained dedicated washing areas called lavabos, where monks would wash their hands before meals, as well as facilities for occasional bathing. The Christian calendar also influenced hygiene practices through its rhythm of feasts and fasts. Major religious festivals were typically preceded by thorough cleaning of both bodies and surroundings, while periods of penance might involve deliberate neglect of physical appearance. Saturday bathing became common in many regions as preparation for Sunday church attendance. As the medieval period progressed, Christian attitudes toward bathing became increasingly nuanced. By the High Middle Ages, theologians distinguished between bathing for health and cleanliness, which was acceptable, and bathing for pleasure, which remained suspect. Public bathhouses operated under church regulation in many towns, with restrictions on mixed bathing and operation on holy days. The one significant exception to general Christian acceptance of moderate cleanliness came from extreme ascetics who deliberately embraced filth as a form of mortification. Figures like Saint Catherine of Siena, who wept over having washed her face to please her mother, or saints who allowed themselves to become infested with parasites as a form of suffering, represented a minority position rather than mainstream practice. Unfortunately, these exceptional cases were sometimes highlighted in religious writings, contributing to later misconceptions about medieval attitudes. In the Islamic world, attitudes toward hygiene were profoundly shaped by religious requirements that made cleanliness an integral part of devotional practice. The Quran and Hadith, sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, contain numerous injunctions regarding purification, creating a religious foundation for elaborate hygiene practices that influenced both Islamic territories and, through cultural exchange, parts of Christian Europe. Ritual purification, tahara, was required before prayer, which practicing Muslims performed 5 times daily. This purification took 2 forms: wudu, a partial ablution involving washing the hands, face, arms, and feet, and ghusl, a full body washing required after certain activities including sexual intercourse. These religious obligations ensured that regular washing was integrated into daily life for all Muslims, regardless of social status. The Prophet Muhammad reportedly said, "Cleanliness is half of faith," elevating hygiene to a religious duty rather than merely a social convention. Other hadith attributed to Muhammad recommended regular tooth cleaning, hand washing before and after meals, regular bathing, and attention to cleanliness of clothing and surroundings. These religious endorsements helped establish a culture that valued cleanliness highly. Islamic urban planning reflected these priorities through the development of sophisticated water supply systems and public bathing facilities. The hammam, or public bath, became a central institution in Islamic cities, serving both the practical need for ritual purification and the social function of community gathering. Unlike the Roman baths they sometimes physically replaced, Islamic hammams typically featured running water rather than standing pools, reflecting concerns about ritual purity that required clean water. Islamic medical writings, which preserved and expanded upon Greek and Roman medical knowledge, emphasized the importance of hygiene in maintaining health. Physicians like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Al-Razi wrote extensively about the benefits of bathing, hand washing, and environmental cleanliness in preventing disease, further reinforcing religious teachings with medical authority. The Islamic emphasis on cleanliness extended beyond personal hygiene to environmental sanitation. Many Islamic cities developed sophisticated systems for water supply and waste removal, with public fountains providing clean water and covered sewers carrying away waste. These infrastructural investments reflected both practical concerns and the religious value placed on maintaining a clean environment. When Christians encountered Islamic hygiene practices during the Crusades and through commercial and diplomatic contacts, reactions were mixed. Some European observers admired the cleanliness of Islamic cities and adopted certain practices, while others viewed excessive washing with suspicion as a marker of cultural difference or even religious deviance. Nevertheless, Islamic influence contributed to the revival of public bathing in parts of Europe, particularly Spain and southern Italy, where cultural contact was most extensive. Medieval Jewish communities maintained distinctive hygiene practices based on religious law, halakha, and cultural traditions. Like Islam, Judaism incorporated ritual purification into religious observance, though with different specific requirements and contexts. The mikveh, a ritual bath used for purification, was a central institution in Jewish communities. Women were required to immerse in the mikveh following menstruation and childbirth before resuming sexual relations with their husbands. Men might use the mikveh before Sabbath and holidays, though male immersion was generally considered customary rather than obligatory. The mikveh required living water, either natural flowing water or a pool connected to rainwater or groundwater, and had to contain enough water to cover the entire body. Beyond ritual immersion, Jewish religious law prescribed regular hand washing in various contexts upon waking in the morning, before meals involving bread, after using the toilet, after cutting nails, after touching certain body parts, and after contact with the dead. These requirements ensured that hand hygiene was a regular part of daily life in Jewish households. Jewish dietary laws, kashrut, also had implications for hygiene. The requirement to separate meat and dairy necessitated multiple sets of dishes and careful cleaning procedures, while the inspection of meat for blemishes created awareness of food safety issues. The prohibition against consuming blood led to careful meat preparation practices, including salting to draw out remaining blood. Medieval Jewish physicians, who often served both Jewish and non-Jewish patients, wrote extensively about hygiene and preventative medicine. Maimonides, the renowned 12th century physician and rabbi, devoted significant portions of his medical works to hygiene, recommending regular bathing, clean clothing, fresh air, and proper waste disposal. His integration of medical knowledge with religious tradition exemplified the Jewish approach to health, that valued both practical measures and spiritual observance. Jewish communities typically organized communal facilities to meet hygiene needs, including the mikveh, public ovens, which reduced fire hazards in densely populated Jewish quarters, and arrangements for waste disposal. Even in the restrictive conditions of medieval ghettos, Jews maintained high standards of personal and communal cleanliness, sometimes attracting notice from Christian observers. During epidemics, particularly the Black Death, Jewish communities often suffered lower mortality rates, likely due in part to better hygiene practices and the relative isolation of Jewish quarters. Tragically, this differential survival sometimes led to accusations that Jews had caused the plague, resulting in persecution and massacres. This pattern illustrates how distinctive hygiene practices could function both as public health measures and as markers of cultural difference, with potentially serious social consequences. Monasteries and convents played a pivotal role in shaping medieval hygiene practices, both through their own internal regulations and through their influence on broader society. As communities dedicated to orderly living according to religious principles, monasteries developed systematic approaches to cleanliness that balanced practical needs with spiritual values. The rule of Saint Benedict, which guided many Western European monasteries from the 6th century onward, addressed hygiene in several contexts. It prescribed regular hand washing, particularly before meals, care for the sick, including bathing as needed, and arrangements for laundry and personal grooming, while advising moderation in bathing for healthy monks. Let it be granted more rarely. The rule recognized the necessity of cleanliness for communal living. Monastic complexes were often architectural showcases for advanced hygiene facilities. Cluny Abbey in France, one of the most influential monasteries of the High Middle Ages, featured a lavabo, washing fountain, where monks would wash their hands before meals, a bathhouse with 12 tubs, and a remarkable toilet facility with 45 individual cubicles arranged over a channel of running water that carried waste away from the monastery. Similar facilities existed at other major monasteries, demonstrating both technical sophistication and institutional commitment to cleanliness. The daily schedule of monastic life incorporated regular opportunities for personal hygiene. Most rules prescribed washing upon rising and before meals, with additional washing after work periods. Communal facilities for washing feet, mandatum, were particularly important, reflecting both practical needs and the symbolic significance of foot washing in Christian tradition. Grooming practices were also regulated in monastic settings. Male monks typically received regular haircuts and shaving, often performed by a designated brother on a weekly schedule. Nuns maintained their own grooming practices, though these are less well documented in surviving records. Laundry arrangements ensured clean clothing and bedding. Many monasteries had dedicated laundry facilities where clothing, bed linens, and altar linens were washed according to scheduled rotations. At Cluny, for instance, towels in the lavabo were changed twice weekly, though the water was changed only once per week. Infirmaries within monasteries often maintained higher standards of cleanliness than the general accommodations, reflecting medical understanding that clean environments promoted healing. Monastic medical practitioners, drawing on both classical medical texts and practical experience, recognized the importance of hygiene in caring for the sick. Beyond their own communities, monasteries influenced broader society through charitable works and example. Many maintained hospices for travelers and the poor, public fountains that provide clean water to surrounding communities, and almshouses for the destitute. These institutions helped disseminate hygiene practices and infrastructure beyond monastery walls. Monastic scribes also preserved and copied medical and household texts that included information about hygiene, ensuring the transmission of this knowledge through the medieval period. Monastery schools educated future clergy and sometimes lay students, providing opportunities to instill hygiene habits in the next generation. While individual monks occasionally embraced extreme asceticism that rejected normal hygiene, such cases were exceptions rather than the rule in well-regulated communities. The lasting contribution of medieval monasticism to hygiene history lies in its systematic approach to cleanliness as part of an ordered, communal life, an approach that influenced households, hospitals, schools, and other institutions throughout the medieval world. The colder climate of Northern Europe shaped distinctive approaches to hygiene that balanced the practical challenges of the environment with cultural and religious influences. While popular stereotypes often depict the region as particularly lacking in cleanliness, evidence suggests a more nuanced reality. In Scandinavia, the sauna or steam bath tradition provided an effective means of cleaning the body despite the cold climate. These structures, heated by stones placed on a fire, created an intensely hot environment where bathers would sweat profusely before rinsing with water or even rolling in snow. Beyond mere cleanliness, these communal bathing practices served important social functions within Nordic communities and were considered essential to health maintenance. Archaeological evidence from Viking settlements reveals grooming implements, including combs, tweezers, and ear scoops, suggesting attention to personal appearance. Literary sources such as the Icelandic sagas contain references to regular washing, with Saturday being traditionally designated as washing day in preparation for the week's end. In the British Isles, bathing practices varied by period and social context. Anglo-Saxon medical texts recommended washing for health purposes, while archaeological finds include basins, ewers, and various grooming implements. The Norman conquest brought continental influences, including more elaborate bathing customs among the nobility. By the later medieval period, public bathhouses operated in London and other major towns, though they were less common than in southern Europe. Castle architecture in Britain reveals attention to sanitation concerns. Survey data indicates that over 80% of medieval castles in the United Kingdom included wells within their interiors, ensuring access to clean water even during sieges. Many castles also featured sophisticated toilet arrangements known as garderobes, private or semi-private facilities built into the thickness of walls with chutes carrying waste to cesspits or moats. In Germanic regions, public bathhouses became increasingly common from the 12th century onward, particularly in urban areas. These establishments, known as stews or badstoven, offered hot baths, steam baths, and sometimes medical services such as cupping and bloodletting. Guild regulations in German cities often specified that craftsmen should visit the bathhouse weekly, suggesting regular bathing was considered normal for urban workers. Northern European monastic communities maintained their own bathing traditions, sometimes featuring elaborate facilities. Durham Cathedral Priory in England, for example, had a sophisticated water system bringing clean water from springs through lead pipes to the monastery, with separate channels for drinking water, cooking water, and waste removal. Rural hygiene in Northern Europe was necessarily adapted to limited resources and harsh conditions. Washing was typically done with cold water, except on special occasions when the effort of heating water was justified. Herb-infused water might be used for both its pleasant scent and supposed medicinal properties. During winter, when outdoor washing was impractical, cleaning might focus on visible parts of the body, with more thorough washing resuming when weather permitted. Clothing practices in colder regions also reflected hygiene concerns. Multiple layers of clothing were worn, with linen undergarments absorbing body oils and sweat. These undergarments were changed and washed more frequently than outer garments, providing a practical approach to personal cleanliness in a climate where regular full-body washing presented challenges. The Mediterranean climate, with its warmer temperatures and longer growing seasons, facilitated different approaches to hygiene than those found in Northern Europe. Many regions around the Mediterranean also maintained stronger connections to Roman bathing traditions, or were influenced by Islamic practices, creating distinctive hygiene cultures. In Italy, public bathhouses continued to operate throughout the medieval period, particularly in larger cities. These establishments, while smaller and less elaborate than their Roman predecessors, provided urban residents with regular bathing opportunities. Venice developed especially sophisticated water management systems, using cisterns to collect rainwater and careful engineering to maintain the lagoon environment despite dense human habitation. Italian cities were among the first in Europe to develop public health regulations addressing sanitation concerns. By the 14th century, cities like Florence and Siena had created health boards, magistrati di sanità, that regulated waste disposal, food quality, and certain aspects of personal hygiene, particularly during plague outbreaks. These regulations represent some of the earliest systematic public health measures in post-Roman Europe. In Spain, hygiene practices reflected the region's complex cultural history, with distinctive traditions developing in Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities. Islamic influence was particularly strong in areas like Andalusia, where hammams, public baths, operated throughout the medieval period. Even after the Christian reconquest, many of these facilities continued to function, though sometimes with new restrictions. The Crown of Aragon, encompassing eastern Spain and parts of the Mediterranean, maintained particularly strong bathing traditions. Records from 14th century Barcelona describe numerous public bathhouses operated by both municipal authorities and private entrepreneurs. King James I of Aragon issued ordinances protecting the right of all citizens, including the poor, to access public baths, suggesting their importance in urban life. Byzantine territories preserved the most direct continuation of Roman bathing culture. Constantinople maintained numerous public baths throughout the medieval period, some dating back to Roman times and others newly constructed. Byzantine palaces featured private bathing suites with hot and cold running water, marble tubs, and sophisticated heating systems. Similar facilities existed in other major Byzantine cities like Thessalonica and Nicaea. Rural hygiene in Mediterranean regions benefited from greater water availability and warmer weather, which made outdoor bathing possible for more of the year. Rivers, lakes, and coastal waters provided bathing opportunities, while rainwater collection systems were common features of households across climate zones and social classes. The Mediterranean diet, rich in olive oil, also influenced hygiene practices. Olive oil was used not only for cooking, but also for personal care, serving as a skin cleanser, hair conditioner, and base for scented preparations. This oil cleansing approach, inherited from classical antiquity, provided an effective alternative to soap in regions where olive oil was abundant. Clothing practices in warmer regions typically involved more frequent washing and changing of garments than in the north, made practical by faster drying times in the Mediterranean climate. Linen, which could be boiled clean without damage, was particularly important for undergarments across social classes. Perfumes and aromatics played an especially important role in Mediterranean hygiene cultures. The region's botanical diversity provided numerous fragrant plants for personal use, while trade networks brought exotic scents from further east. Rosewater, orange blossom water, and various herbal preparations were used for both their pleasant scents and their supposed health benefits in mitigating harmful air. Eastern European hygiene practices were shaped by a unique confluence of influences, including Byzantine traditions, Western European practices, and in some regions, contact with Mongol and Turkish cultures. Religious differences, particularly between Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, also contributed to distinctive regional approaches to cleanliness. In the Byzantine-influenced areas of Eastern Europe, including parts of what are now Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia, bathing practices showed strong continuity with late Roman customs. Public bathhouses operated in major cities, while monastic communities maintained their own bathing facilities. The Orthodox Church generally took a more positive view of bathing than its Western counterpart, considering cleanliness important for both physical and spiritual well-being. Russia developed its own distinctive bathing tradition in the form of the banya, a steam bath somewhat similar to the Scandinavian. Russia developed its own distinctive bathing tradition in the form of the banya, a steam bath somewhat similar to the Scandinavian sauna, but with its own cultural practices. The banya was not merely a place for washing, but a social institution and ritual space. Bathers would beat themselves or each other with bundles of birch twigs, venix, to improve circulation and cleanse the skin. Like the Nordic sauna, the banya involved intense heat followed by cooling, sometimes by jumping into cold water or snow. Foreign visitors to Russia frequently commented on the banya tradition. The German ambassador to Moscow, Sigismund von Herberstein, wrote in the early 16th century that the Russians are in the habit of steaming themselves frequently, almost weekly, and that all men and women will lie there until they are tired out, and will lash and beat themselves with rods, and finally, covered with sweat, will rush out of the room and throw themselves into cold water, or have cold water poured over them. In Poland and Lithuania, bathing practices reflected both Western and Eastern influences. Public bathhouses operated in major cities like Krakow and Vilnius, while steam baths similar to the Russian banya were common in rural areas. The Polish king Casimir the Great was known for establishing public baths in various towns as part of his urban development initiatives in the 14th century. Hungarian bathing culture was particularly rich, influenced by Roman remains, especially in areas like Aquincum, modern Budapest, Byzantine traditions, and later Ottoman Turkish practices. Natural hot springs in the region were utilized for bathing from ancient times through the medieval period. The thermal baths of Buda were famous throughout Europe, with facilities catering to different social classes. Eastern European monastic communities, particularly those following Eastern Orthodox traditions, maintained their own approaches to hygiene. The monastic rules of Saint Basil, widely followed in Orthodox monasteries, addressed cleanliness in the context of moderation and community needs. Many Orthodox monasteries maintained substantial bathing facilities, reflecting the practical recognition that cleanliness supported the communal lifestyle. Rural hygiene practices in Eastern Europe were adapted to local conditions and resources. In forest regions, ash from wood fires was used to make lye for washing bodies and clothes. Various local herbs were employed for their cleansing and aromatic properties, with traditions varying by specific region and available flora. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century and subsequent establishment of the Golden Horde in parts of Eastern Europe introduced additional cultural influences on hygiene practices. Mongol camps typically maintained strict cleanliness rules, particularly regarding water sources, which influenced subject populations. Later, Ottoman Turkish expansion brought hammam culture to southeastern Europe, with many Turkish baths established in conquered territories. Throughout Eastern Europe, as elsewhere, river bathing was common during warmer months, providing a practical solution for personal cleanliness, especially for lower social classes without access to private facilities. This practice was often integrated with seasonal and religious observances, with specific bathing days associated with Orthodox Christian festivals. While technically outside the traditional boundaries of medieval Europe, the Islamic world's hygiene practices merit detailed discussion, both for their own sophistication and for their influence on European approaches to cleanliness through cultural exchange, particularly in Spain, Sicily, and the Crusader states. Islamic civilization placed exceptional emphasis on cleanliness, driven by both religious requirements and the medical knowledge preserved and expanded from classical sources. The result was a hygiene culture substantially more elaborate than that found in most contemporary Christian regions. The hammam, or public bath, represented the centerpiece of urban hygiene infrastructure in Islamic cities. Typically featuring multiple chambers maintained at different temperatures, these establishments allowed patrons to progress through rooms for undressing, warming, intense heat, and cooling. Unlike Roman baths, which often used standing water, Islamic baths generally employed running water for greater ritual purity. Architectural evidence reveals the cultural importance of these facilities. Even modest Islamic towns typically contained multiple public baths, while major cities might have dozens or hundreds. When Muslims conquered Byzantine territories, they often converted existing bath structures while adapting them to Islamic requirements, particularly regarding gender segregation. Most hammams operated with separate hours or facilities for men and women, though practices varied by region and period. Attendants provided services including massage, hair removal, and assistance with washing. The hammam served not only for cleanliness, but as a social space where business might be discussed, marriages arranged, and community bonds strengthened. Beyond public facilities, private hygiene was also highly developed. Wealthy households in cities like Cairo, Damascus, and Cordoba typically included private bathing facilities. Archaeological excavations reveal sophisticated plumbing systems, bringing water to residential areas and carrying waste away, particularly in palace complexes like the Alhambra in Granada. Personal grooming products were diverse and sophisticated. Soap manufacturing became a major industry in several Islamic cities, with different varieties produced for specific purposes. Perfumes, unguents, and cosmetics were widely used across social classes. Henna served both decorative and hygienic purposes, used to color hair and nails, while also offering cooling properties in hot climates. Medical texts from the Islamic world devoted considerable attention to hygiene. The physician Al-Razi wrote extensively about the health benefits of bathing and the importance of clean surroundings in preventing disease. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, included detailed advice on personal cleanliness in his influential Canon of Medicine, which later became a standard medical text in European universities. The cultural emphasis on cleanliness extended to public spaces as well. Many Islamic cities featured elaborate water supply systems, with public fountains providing clean water for drinking and ritual ablutions. Markets were regularly cleaned, with inspectors, muhtasibs, enforcing regulations regarding food safety and waste disposal. When Europeans encountered Islamic hygiene practices during the Crusades, reactions were mixed. Some crusaders adopted aspects of local bathing customs, particularly therapeutic bathing for medical purposes. Others viewed the elaborate attention to bodily cleanliness with suspicion, considering it evidence of sensuality or excessive luxury. In regions of cultural contact, such as Norman Sicily and parts of Spain, Islamic influence led to the adoption or maintenance of public bathing facilities under Christian rule. Alfonso VI of Castile, for instance, maintained the hammams of Toledo after conquering the city in 1085, recognizing their importance to public life. The gradual decline of Islamic political power in the Mediterranean did not immediately erase the hygiene traditions established during centuries of Muslim rule. Many practices continued under new political arrangements, while others were adapted or transformed through cultural exchange. The legacy of Islamic hygiene expertise continued to influence European approaches to cleanliness well into the early modern period. The medieval nobility maintained the most elaborate hygiene practices of any social group, using cleanliness as both a practical comfort and a marker of social status. Their approaches to personal hygiene reflected their wealth, living conditions, and cultural expectations. Castle and manor architecture incorporated various hygiene facilities according to the period and the owner's resources. By the High Middle Ages, noble residences typically included private or semi-private toilet facilities called garderobes, closet-like rooms built into the thickness of walls with chutes leading to cesspits or moats. While primitive by modern standards, these arrangements provided more privacy and convenience than was available to most of the population. Bathing arrangements for the nobility evolved over time. In the early medieval period, wooden tubs brought to chambers and filled with heated water were the norm even in royal households. By the later Middle Ages, wealthy nobles might have dedicated bathing chambers with permanent tubs, sometimes with basic plumbing to fill and drain them. King Charles V of France had bathrooms installed in the Louvre in the 14th century, while the Château de Heston featured bathrooms with hot and cold running water. Bathing frequency among the nobility varied widely depending on individual preference, medical advice, and changing fashions. Some nobles bathed weekly or even more frequently, while others might bathe monthly or seasonally. Despite popular misconceptions, total abstention from bathing was rare except among those deliberately practicing extreme religious asceticism. The bathing process itself could be elaborate. The water might be perfumed with herbs or flower petals, and bathing often occurred in a social context, with attendants assisting and sometimes multiple people sharing a bath. After bathing, the body might be rubbed with scented oils or powders. Some noble households maintained dedicated staff for bath preparation and assistance. Hand washing was particularly emphasized, with servants presenting bowls of scented water to diners before and after meals. This practice was both practical, given that most food was eaten with the fingers, and ceremonial, demonstrating the household's refinement. Grooming and cosmetic practices among the nobility were extensive. Both men and women used various preparations to maintain their appearance, though specific practices varied by period, region, and gender. Hair care involved regular combing with ornate combs made of ivory, bone, or precious metals. Women's elaborate hairstyles might require hours of attention from servants, while men's hair and beard styles followed changing fashions that required regular maintenance. Dental care included tooth cleaning with cloths, dentifrice powders made from herbs and minerals, and toothpicks of gold or silver for removing food particles. Breath fresheners included cloves, cinnamon, and various herbal preparations. Clothing hygiene was maintained through frequent changes rather than regular washing of outer garments. Nobles typically owned multiple sets of clothing and changed their linen undergarments daily or several times weekly. These linen undergarments, which absorbed sweat and body oils, were more easily washed than the elaborate outer garments, often made of wool, silk, or velvet. Wardrobes were protected from insects using herbs like lavender and rosemary. Perfumes and scented products were used extensively to mask body odors and create pleasant environments. Nobles might carry pomanders, perforated containers holding aromatic substances, or sachets of dried herbs. Rooms were scented with burning incense, scattered herbs, or flowers according to the season. During travel, maintaining hygiene presented greater challenges, but noble households typically transported bathing equipment and other necessities. Royal progress accounts show that bathtubs, basins, and personal hygiene items were considered essential baggage when the court moved between residences. The hygiene practices of the nobility were observed and sometimes criticized by contemporaries. Moralists occasionally condemned excessive attention to appearance as vanity, while medical writers debated the health implications of different bathing practices. Nevertheless, cleanliness remained an important aspect of noble self-presentation throughout the medieval period. The growing urban middle classes of the High and Late Middle Ages developed distinctive approaches to hygiene that balanced practical needs with limited space and resources. As towns and cities expanded from the 11th century onward, hygiene infrastructure and practices evolved to address the challenges of densely populated environments. Public bathhouses played a central role in urban hygiene. By the 13th century, most substantial towns in Europe had at least one bathhouse, with larger cities maintaining dozens. These establishments served multiple functions, providing bathing facilities for those without private arrangements, offering spaces for socialization, and sometimes providing additional services like haircutting, shaving, and medical treatments such as cupping and bloodletting. Guild regulations sometimes specified hygiene requirements for members, recognizing that the reputation of a trade depended partly on the appearance of its practitioners. Food handlers, in particular, were subject to cleanliness regulations. In 1475, the Bakers' Guild of London required members to wash their hands before handling any bread paste. Similarly, butchers were required to keep their stalls clean and dispose of offal properly to prevent unpleasant odors and potential health hazards. Urban households typically owned basic washing equipment, including basins, ewers, pitchers, and towels. Archaeological excavations in medieval towns across Europe have uncovered numerous examples of these items, in materials ranging from simple pottery to elaborate metalwork, suggesting their importance in daily life across economic levels. Water access varied significantly between towns and within different areas of the same town. Some cities maintained public fountains or wells where residents could collect water for household use. In others, water carriers sold water drawn from rivers or springs, delivering it to homes for a fee. Wealthier households might have private wells, while those of more modest means shared communal water sources, sometimes leading to disputes over access and maintenance responsibilities. Laundry practices in urban settings adapted to space constraints. While rural households might wash clothing in streams or ponds, urban dwellers often used communal washing areas or employed professional laundresses. Laundry was typically done with lye soap, made from a combination of animal fat and wood ash. Clothing was beaten, rubbed, rinsed, and then dried on lines or bushes. Waste disposal presented particular challenges in urban environments. While some cities developed sophisticated systems for removing human waste and household garbage, others relied on more primitive arrangements. Chamber pots emptied into streets, cesspits beneath or behind houses, or directly into waterways created obvious hygiene problems. Gradually, many towns implemented regulations prohibiting the most harmful practices, such as throwing waste into the street during daylight hours or near public water sources. Personal grooming services were widely available in medieval towns. Barbers offered haircuts and shaving, while specialized practitioners might provide services like nail trimming or ear cleaning. These professionals often worked in public spaces like marketplaces or bathhouses, making their services accessible to a broad clientele. Housing conditions influenced hygiene practices. The typical urban dwelling was smaller and housed more people than its rural counterpart, creating challenges for privacy and cleanliness. Multi-story buildings with shared facilities required cooperation among residents to maintain sanitary conditions. Wooden floors were typically covered with rushes or straw, which absorbed spills and dirt. These coverings were periodically replaced, with fresh herbs sometimes added for their pleasant scent and supposed ability to repel insects and disease. Urban households developed practical strategies to maintain cleanliness within these constraints. Hand washing before meals remained standard practice across social classes. Regular sweeping removed visible dirt from living spaces. Clothing was aired and brushed to remove dust and odors between less frequent washings. Herbs and flowers strewn about rooms served both decorative and practical purposes, masking odors and supposedly purifying the air. The urban middle classes, particularly successful merchants and guild masters, increasingly adopted hygiene practices associated with the nobility as their wealth increased. Private bathing equipment, finer grooming implements, and imported perfumes or soaps became status symbols indicating a household's prosperity and refinement. Rural hygiene practices have left fewer documentary traces than those of urban or elite populations, leading to historical neglect and contributing to stereotypes of the filthy medieval peasant. However, archaeological evidence, folk traditions, and occasional references in legal and literary sources provide insights into how the majority of the medieval population maintained cleanliness within the constraints of their environment and resources. Contrary to popular misconceptions, medieval peasants showed clear concern for personal cleanliness. The primary limitation they faced was not lack of interest, but practical challenges. Limited access to heated water, soap, and private facilities, combined with the physical demands of agricultural labor that made staying clean difficult. River bathing represented the most accessible form of washing for many rural communities. Archaeological evidence and literary references indicate that swimming and bathing in natural water sources was common during warmer months. This practice often combined practical hygiene with recreation and social interaction. Some communities maintained designated washing places along riverbanks, sometimes with separate areas for men and women. During colder seasons, when outdoor bathing was impractical, peasant households typically washed using basins of water heated over the hearth fire. Given the labor involved in carrying water and the fuel required for heating it, such washing usually focused on visible body parts, face, hands, and feet, rather than full immersion. Complete baths might be taken only on special occasions, such as before major religious festivals. Archaeological excavations of peasant dwellings have uncovered simple washing implements, including wooden or ceramic basins, suggesting regular washing practices. Personal grooming tools like combs made of bone, wood, or horn appear consistently in rural archaeological contexts across Europe, indicating their importance in daily life. Dental hygiene among rural populations relied primarily on chewing sticks, typically made from woods with natural antiseptic properties, like hazel or willow. These would be chewed at one end to create a frayed, brush-like texture, then used to clean the teeth. Rural communities also used various herbs as mouth fresheners and for their supposed dental health benefits. Laundry practices adapted to rural conditions. Clothing was typically washed in streams or ponds, using wooden beating paddles and homemade lye soap or other cleansing agents like soapwort, Saponaria officinalis, a plant containing natural saponins that create a lather when crushed and mixed with water. Washing clothing was communal work, often performed by women together, combining practical necessity with social interaction. Clothing hygiene relied more on strategic changing and airing than frequent washing of all garments. Working clothes became soiled quickly through agricultural labor and were difficult to clean thoroughly. However, most peasants maintained separate sets of clothing for everyday wear and special occasions like church attendance or village celebrations. Linen undergarments absorbed sweat and oils and could be washed more easily than outer garments made of wool. Housing conditions influenced hygiene practices. The typical peasant dwelling, a simple structure with earthen floors, limited windows, and a central hearth, presented obvious challenges for cleanliness. Floors might be strewn with fresh rushes or straw, which absorbed dirt and spills and could be periodically replaced. Some evidence suggests that herbs were mixed with these floor coverings, both for their pleasant scent and for their supposed ability to repel insects and disease. Waste disposal in rural settings was generally less problematic than in urban areas due to lower population density. Human waste was typically deposited in simple pit latrines located away from the dwelling, while household waste might be composted for use as fertilizer or fed to domestic animals. The recycling of organic materials was more comprehensive than in modern households, with fewer genuinely waste products. Seasonal patterns strongly influenced rural hygiene. Spring cleaning traditions found across Europe typically involve thorough washing of household items, airing of bedding and clothing, and general refreshing of living spaces after the confinement of winter. Similar cleaning rituals often preceded major religious festivals, combining practical hygiene with spiritual preparation. The Church's influence on rural hygiene operated through its calendar of observances and its moral teachings. Saturday bathing became customary in many regions as preparation for Sunday services. Major festivals like Easter were preceded by thorough cleaning of both bodies and surroundings. Parish priests might address basic hygiene issues as part of their responsibility for community welfare, though with varying degrees of emphasis depending on individual priorities. Folk medicine in rural communities often included hygiene practices justified by traditional wisdom rather than formal medical theory. Various herbs were used for their cleansing properties, chosen based on local availability and generational knowledge. These traditional practices sometimes incorporated effective natural antibacterials and antiseptics, though without understanding their mechanism of action. Regional variations in rural hygiene reflected differences in climate, available resources, and cultural influences. Mediterranean peasants benefited from warmer weather that facilitated outdoor washing for more of the year, while Nordic communities developed steam bath traditions that provided effective cleansing even in cold climates. Areas with access to particular resources, such as olive oil in Mediterranean regions or certain herbs in specific locales, developed distinctive cleaning methods based on these materials. Despite these efforts, maintaining cleanliness presented genuine challenges for the rural population. Agricultural work inevitably involved dirt and animal contact. Housing conditions, with multiple people and sometimes animals sharing limited space, complicated efforts to maintain clean living environments. Limited resources meant that hygiene often required significant labor that competed with other essential tasks. Nevertheless, the evidence consistently indicates that medieval peasants valued cleanliness and developed practical strategies to achieve it within their constraints. The clergy occupied a unique position in medieval society regarding hygiene, both as practitioners of specific cleanliness regimes and as shapers of broader cultural attitudes through their teachings and example. Different categories of religious personnel, from parish priests to cloistered monks and nuns, from wandering friars to high church officials, maintained distinctive approaches to personal cleanliness. Monasteries and convents developed the most systematic approaches to hygiene within religious contexts. The rule of Saint Benedict, which guided numerous religious communities, addressed cleanliness in practical terms. The care of the sick is to be placed above and before every other duty. There shall be a separate kitchen for the sick. Baths shall be offered to the sick as often as necessary, but to the healthy, and especially the young, more rarely. This balanced approach recognized both the practical necessity of cleanliness and concerns about excessive attention to bodily comfort. Monastic complexes often featured sophisticated hygiene infrastructure. The plan of the ideal monastery drawn at St. Gall in the early 9th century included designated areas for washing, bathing the sick, and toilet facilities, along with an elaborate water supply system. Archaeological excavations at major monasteries like Cluny in France and Fountains Abbey in England have revealed advanced water management systems that brought clean water for drinking and washing while carrying away waste. Daily hygiene rituals were integrated into monastic schedules. Most rules prescribed hand-washing upon rising and before meals, with a particular emphasis on the symbolic and practical cleansing of hands before handling sacred objects. The lavabo, a washing fountain or basin typically located near the refectory, dining hall, became a standard architectural feature in monasteries. Grooming practices for monks typically included regular shaving and haircuts, reflecting both practical concerns about parasites and the symbolic meaning of the tonsure, the shaved crown of the head that visibly identified a monk. These procedures were often performed communally on a scheduled basis, with one brother serving as barber for the community. For nuns, grooming practices are less well documented, but would have included hair management. Most rules required women's hair to be covered, and basic cleanliness compatible with vows of modesty. Veiling served both symbolic and practical purposes, simplifying hair care while expressing religious commitment. Bathing practices in religious communities balanced hygiene needs with concerns about modesty and excessive comfort. Most monastic rules permitted regular washing of hands, feet, and face, with full-body bathing allowed less frequently or reserved for the sick. However, archaeological evidence suggests that many larger monasteries maintained substantial bathing facilities, indicating that practice might have been more generous than the minimal requirements of written rules. Attitudes toward bathing varied significantly between different religious orders and over time. The Cistercians, known for their austerity, initially limited bathing more strictly than the Benedictines, though they maintained high standards of cleanliness in other respects. The mendicant orders, Franciscans and Dominicans, that emerged in the 13th century embraced voluntary poverty that sometimes included deliberate neglect of conventional cleanliness, though this varied widely among individuals and communities. Certain saints and religious extremists deliberately rejected normal hygiene as a form of asceticism, embracing filth as a sign of their rejection of worldly comforts. Saint Catherine of Siena reportedly wept when she washed her face to please her mother, while Saint Godric of Finchal was said to have worn the same hair shirt for decades without washing it. However, these cases were exceptional rather than typical, recorded precisely because they deviated from normal expectations. Parish clergy, living in the community rather than in cloistered settings, generally followed the hygiene norms of their social peers, though with some modifications based on their religious role. Priests were expected to maintain a respectable appearance, appropriate to their handling of sacred objects and performance of sacraments. Church councils occasionally addressed clergy appearance, suggesting that maintaining basic cleanliness was considered part of the dignity of the clerical office. Higher church officials, particularly bishops and abbots, often maintained hygiene standards similar to those of the secular nobility with whom they frequently interacted. Financial accounts from episcopal households show expenditures for bathing equipment, grooming implements, and washing services comparable to those found in noble households of similar status. Religious teachings influenced broader societal attitudes toward hygiene. While Christianity never categorically condemned cleanliness, certain theological perspectives emphasized the dangers of excessive attention to bodily comfort and appearance. St. Jerome's warning that a clean body and a clean dress mean an unclean soul represented an extreme position, but the tension between physical and spiritual priorities remained a recurring theme in religious discourse about hygiene. In practice, the Church's influence on popular hygiene often operated through the religious calendar. Major festivals were preceded by thorough cleaning of both bodies and surroundings, while certain days of the week, particularly Saturday, became associated with bathing in preparation for Sunday worship. These patterns linked physical cleanliness with spiritual preparation, creating a rhythm of hygiene practices tied to religious observance. The Church also shaped attitudes toward public bathing establishments, which were sometimes associated with moral concerns. By the late medieval period, many church authorities had become suspicious of mixed-gender bathing and other practices in public bathhouses. However, this represented a concern about specific behaviors rather than bathing itself, as religious institutions continued to maintain their own washing facilities and to acknowledge the legitimacy of moderate attention to cleanliness. Medieval cities faced substantial challenges in managing waste and maintaining sanitary conditions in densely populated environments. The solutions developed to address these challenges varied widely in sophistication and effectiveness, influenced by factors including population size, geographical setting, political organization, and cultural attitudes. The inheritance of Roman infrastructure shaped sanitation systems in some regions, particularly in former Roman cities that maintained continuity of settlement. In places like Rome itself, Constantinople, and certain cities in southern Europe, elements of Roman sewers, aqueducts, and public facilities remained partially functional throughout the medieval period, though typically at reduced capacity and with modifications. Many medieval cities implemented regulations attempting to manage waste disposal and maintain public cleanliness. By the 13th century, cities like London, Paris, and Florence had established ordinances prohibiting the most problematic practices, such as throwing waste into the streets during daylight hours, dumping garbage near water sources, or allowing animals to roam freely in certain areas. The effectiveness of these regulations varied with enforcement capacity and public cooperation. Professional waste collectors emerged in larger cities, paid either by municipal authorities or directly by households. In London, rakers collected solid waste from streets, while gong farmers emptied cesspits. Similar specialists operated in other major cities, creating early versions of municipal sanitation services. The physical layout of medieval cities influenced waste management strategies. Narrow streets complicated waste collection, while limited open space within city walls restricted disposal options. As cities grew, These challenges intensified, sometimes leading to increasingly prescriptive regulations and innovative solutions. Waste disposal methods included several common approaches. Household waste might be thrown into the street, ideally at designated times, deposited in cesspits beneath or behind houses, carried to communal dumps outside city walls, or thrown directly into waterways. Each method created its own problems. Streets became foul, cesspits leaked and required periodic emptying, dumps outside walls generated unpleasant odors and attracted vermin, and waterways became polluted. Some cities developed more sophisticated waste removal systems. Certain streets in medieval London had central channels designed to carry waste away, while others were equipped with gutters along the sides. In particularly well-organized cities, these channels might connect to larger sewers leading outside the city walls or to natural waterways. Industrial waste posed special challenges. Butchers, tanners, dyers, and other craftspeople whose work generated significant waste or unpleasant odors were often required to locate their businesses in specific areas, typically downwind or downstream from the main city center. Guild regulations sometimes addressed waste disposal methods for specific trades, recognizing both the practical problems and potential public health concerns. Animal management represented another aspect of urban sanitation. Livestock within city walls, including horses for transportation, cows for milk, and pigs that sometimes roamed freely as unofficial garbage disposal systems, generated substantial waste. By the later medieval period, many cities had implemented restrictions on animal keeping within certain districts or required specific waste management practices for animal owners. The effectiveness of these various approaches to waste management varied dramatically between cities and over time. Archaeological evidence reveals that some medieval cities maintained remarkably clean environments through effective organization and enforcement, while others struggled with accumulating waste and resulting sanitation problems. Perceptions of what constituted acceptable urban cleanliness also varied by cultural context. Visitors' accounts often comment on cleanliness or filth when describing foreign cities, suggesting that expectations differed between regions. For example, European travelers to Islamic cities frequently remarked on their cleanliness, while Islamic visitors sometimes criticized European cities for their waste management practices. Plague outbreaks in the 14th century stimulated new attention to urban sanitation in many regions. Cities implemented more stringent cleaning requirements, expanded waste removal services, and isolated areas associated with foul odors. These measures reflected both practical responses to crisis and the prevailing medical theory that linked disease to miasma or corrupted air associated with decay and filth. The most advanced waste management systems appeared in cities with strong central authority, substantial resources, and geographical advantages. Venice, built in a lagoon environment especially vulnerable to pollution, developed particularly sophisticated approaches, including regulations prohibiting waste disposal in canals, specialized collection services, and strategic use of tidal flows to flush the system. Similarly, Islamic cities like Cordoba and Cairo implemented extensive sewage systems and strict regulations regarding waste disposal and street cleaning. Despite these efforts, medieval cities generally struggled with waste management problems that would only be fully resolved with modern sewage systems and waste treatment facilities. However, the diversity and sophistication of medieval approaches to urban sanitation challenged simplistic notions of uniformly filthy medieval cities, revealing instead a complex picture of practical problems, innovative solutions, and evolving standards of public cleanliness. Access to clean water represented a fundamental hygiene challenge throughout the medieval period. addressed through various technological and organizational solutions, depending on local conditions, available resources, and inherited infrastructure. Roman aqueducts continued to function in some regions, though typically at reduced capacity and with modifications. Cities including Rome, Constantinople, and Segovia maintained elements of their Roman water supply systems throughout the medieval period. In Rome, maintenance of the aqueducts became the responsibility of the papacy, which invested in repairs during periods of relative stability and prosperity. Even when the full aqueduct systems no longer functioned, their terminal fountains or distribution points often remained in use, supplied by local springs or wells rather than the original distant water sources. Urban water supplies typically relied on multiple sources. Public wells within city walls provided convenient access points, though water quality varied depending on local groundwater conditions and proximity to contamination sources like cesspits. Natural springs, where available, offered higher quality water and were often protected by special regulations. Rivers provided another water source, though typically of lower quality due to upstream contamination. Public fountains served as important water distribution points in many cities. These range from simple spouts to elaborate architectural features, sometimes combined with washing facilities. Fountains might be maintained by municipal authorities, religious institutions, guilds, or wealthy benefactors who considered their provision a form of charity or civic duty. Water carriers operated as commercial enterprises in many cities, delivering water from preferred sources to households for a fee. This service was particularly important in hilly cities where carrying water from public sources involved significant labor. In Paris, the Corporation of Water Carriers, Porteurs d'eau, was officially recognized by the 13th century, highlighting the importance of this profession in urban water distribution. Private wells served wealthier households in many cities, providing convenient access to water without reliance on public sources or water carriers. Archaeological excavations have uncovered numerous examples of these private facilities, which represented significant investments in household infrastructure. Rainwater collection systems provided supplementary water sources, particularly in regions with limited groundwater. Cisterns beneath courtyards or buildings collected rainwater from roofs, providing reserves for periods of drought or for specific purposes like laundry, where water quality was less critical than quantity. Venice developed particularly sophisticated rainwater collection systems using filtration through sand to improve water quality. Water quality concerns were recognized, though understood through different conceptual frameworks than modern science. Clear, odorless, tasteless water was preferred, with sources away from known contamination given priority. Some cities implemented regulations protecting water sources from pollution, such as prohibiting certain activities near wells or upstream from collection points. Specialized water infrastructure served particular institutions. Monasteries often developed elaborate systems bringing water from clean sources through pipes or channels to serve their communities. These systems typically provided different quality water for different purposes: drinking water from the purest sources, washing water that might be of lower quality, and water for waste removal that could be reused from other functions. Castle water supplies represented another specialized category, designed to maintain access during sieges. Many castles included wells within their walls, sometimes reaching remarkable depths to access groundwater below the level of potential contamination from surface sources. Rainwater collection systems provided supplementary supplies, while some castles included elaborate works to access distant springs through protected channels. Rural water supplies typically relied on natural sources like springs, streams, and shallow wells. Village settlements were usually located with water access as a primary consideration, often centered around a reliable water source. Community wells served as important gathering places as well as practical facilities, and their maintenance might be organized through formal or informal collective arrangements. The technology for moving and lifting water included various mechanical innovations. Water wheels powered pumps in some locations, lifting river water to higher elevations for distribution. Human-powered lifting devices like swipes, counterweighted beams, and windlasses, hand-cranked drums facilitated water extraction from deeper wells. Aqueducts, carrying water over valleys, and pipe systems, distributing water within settlements, required sophisticated engineering knowledge maintained and developed throughout the period. Lead, wood, and ceramic served as common materials for water pipes, each with different characteristics, advantages, and limitations. Lead pipes, inherited from Roman practice, allowed for pressure systems but introduced potential contamination. Wooden pipes, typically made from hollowed logs, were cheaper but less durable and limited to low-pressure applications. Ceramic pipes offered good durability but were fragile and difficult to join effectively. The distribution of water resources often reflected and reinforced social hierarchies. Priority access typically went to elite institutions and households, while ordinary residents relied on more communal or commercial arrangements. Nevertheless, the provision of public water access was widely recognized as a necessary function of urban governance and a worthy object of charitable attention, reflected in the numerous fountains and wells established by municipal authorities, religious institutions, and private donors throughout the medieval world. Public bathing facilities represented important hygiene infrastructure in many medieval communities, though their prevalence, design, and social function varied significantly by region, period, and cultural context. The Roman tradition of public baths, thermae, continued most directly in the Byzantine Empire, where facilities inherited from the Roman period remained in use, sometimes with modifications reflecting changing cultural practices and available resources. Constantinople maintained numerous public baths throughout the medieval period, serving practical hygiene needs while also functioning as social gathering spaces. In the Islamic world, the hammam or public bath became a central institution in cities across North Africa, the Middle East, and Islamic Spain. These facilities typically featured a progression of rooms maintained at different temperatures, allowing bathers to warm gradually, sweat profusely, and then wash thoroughly. Unlike Roman baths, which often utilized standing water and pools, Islamic baths emphasized running water for greater ritual purity. Western European bathing establishments, variously known as stews, bagnios, or bathhouses, became increasingly common from the 12th century onward, particularly in urban areas. By the 14th century, most substantial towns had at least one public bathhouse, with larger cities maintaining numerous facilities. Paris reportedly had 32 public bathhouses by the late 13th century, while Nuremberg maintained 9 for a smaller population. The physical structure of Western European bathhouses varied from simple establishments with wooden tubs to more elaborate facilities with steam rooms, individual bathing chambers, and areas for socializing. Many offered multiple services beyond bathing, including hair cutting, shaving, cupping, a medical procedure involving the application of heated cups to the skin, and sometimes food and drink. Gender arrangements in public baths varied by region and establishment. Islamic hammams typically operated with strict gender segregation, providing either separate facilities or different operating hours for men and women. In Western Europe, Practices ranged from complete segregation to mixed bathing, with the latter becoming increasingly controversial over time as moral concerns about bathing establishments intensified. The social function of public baths extended beyond mere cleanliness. These establishments served as gathering places where people exchanged news, conducted business, celebrated special occasions, and reinforced community bonds. In many regions, bath attendance marked significant life events such as weddings, with special bathing rituals forming part of marriage celebrations. Municipal regulation of bathhouses became increasingly common as these establishments proliferated. Authorities set operating hours, established price controls, required certain hygiene standards, and attempted to prevent prostitution and other activities considered morally problematic. The effectiveness of these regulations varied widely, with enforcement often complicated by the private ownership of many facilities. Medical perspectives on public bathing evolved over time. Early medieval medical texts, drawing on classical sources, generally recommended moderate bathing for health purposes. By the 14th century, however, medical authorities had become more cautious, warning that excessive bathing could weaken the body by opening the pores too much and potentially allowing disease to enter. During plague outbreaks, physicians often advised against public bathing, correctly observing that disease seemed to spread in communal settings, though misunderstanding the exact mechanism of transmission. The late medieval period saw a gradual decline in public bathing establishments in many parts of Western Europe, resulting from a combination of factors. Moral concerns about mixed bathing and prostitution led to increased regulation and occasional closure of facilities. Outbreaks of epidemic disease, particularly plague, created fear of contagion in communal bathing settings. The spread of syphilis in the late 15th century further intensified these concerns. Economic factors also played a role, as the cost of fuel for heating water increased in some regions due to deforestation and changing patterns of land use. This decline was neither uniform nor complete. Some regions maintained stronger bathing traditions than others, particularly areas with natural hot springs, Germanic territories with strong cultural attachment to steam bathing, and regions influenced by Islamic or Byzantine practices. Even as public facilities became less common, private bathing continued in households that could afford the necessary equipment and fuel. The supposed complete rejection of bathing in the late medieval period represents a historical exaggeration rather than an accurate description of complex and varying practices. While certain public facilities closed and medical advice became more cautious about some forms of bathing, basic washing remained an expected part of personal hygiene throughout the period. Bookmark: and waste disposal. Medieval approaches to toilet facilities and human waste disposal reflected practical responses to a universal biological necessity, adapted to different environmental contexts, technological capabilities, and cultural expectations. The simplest and most widespread toilet facility was the pit latrine, a hole in the ground covered by a wooden seat or platform located away from living spaces and water sources. Archaeological excavations have uncovered numerous examples of these facilities in rural settings, small towns, and the less affluent areas of larger cities. When filled, these pits would be covered over and new ones dug, creating a sustainable, if basic, system. More elaborate toilet facilities appeared in castles, monasteries, and wealthy urban households. The garderobe became a standard feature in castle architecture, a small room projecting from an upper wall with a seat positioned over a vertical shaft discharging into a cesspit, moat, or directly into a watercourse below. Some castles featured multiple garderobes arranged vertically, serving different floors of the structure. Monastic toilet facilities represented some of the most sophisticated sanitation arrangements of the period. The monastery at Cluny in France maintained a remarkable facility with 45 individual cubicles arranged over a channel of running water that carried waste away from the complex. Similar systems, though typically on a smaller scale, existed at other major monasteries, reflecting both practical necessity and the organizational capacity to develop and maintain complex infrastructure. In urban settings, cesspits beneath or behind houses served as common waste receptacles. Archaeological investigations reveal that these pits were typically lined with stone, wood, or clay to prevent leakage into surrounding soil. When filled, cesspits required emptying, a service performed by specialized workers known variously as gong farmers, night soil men, or other local terms. This unpleasant but essential work typically commanded relatively high pay, reflecting both its necessity and its disagreeable nature. For those without access to private facilities, public latrines operated in some towns and cities. These ranged from simple arrangements over waterways or moats to more elaborate structures with multiple seats. London Bridge, for example, included public latrines positioned over the Thames, while Paris maintained public facilities along the Seine. The effectiveness of these arrangements from a public health perspective was obviously limited, as they discharged untreated waste directly into waterways that might also serve as food for the fishes.